Have you ever considered that the most obvious solutions in life can be the most destructive? What if what you've been taught turns out to be a lie? Prepare to discover how one audacious decision overturned all the rules of war and saved hundreds of lives, defying common sense. This is a story that will make you rethink your ideas about strategy and risk. On September 28, 1944, on Ngeibus Island in Palau, Japanese forces had seemingly done everything right. Major General Hoshi Imamura and his troops transformed a narrow causeway into a perfect kill zone. Mortars were zeroed in, machine guns had interlocking fields of fire, and artillery coordinates were calculated to the meter. 470 defenders, sheltered behind reinforced concrete structures, watched the only path American Marines could take. Every military doctrine stated the same. Amphibious operations follow the path of least resistance. Land on the beach closest to the objective. Choose the obvious route. The Japanese had studied marine tactics for 3 years of island warfare. They knew exactly where Colonel William "Bucky" Harris and his 3rd Battalion would land. They could practically set their watches to it. Stay with us and watch till the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and subscribe. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching us from. As dawn broke over the Pacific, Japanese artillerymen peered through their sights, aimed at the empty causeway, their fingers on the triggers, awaiting the inevitable assault into their perfectly planned trap. The kill zone was flawless. The timing was perfect. But the Marines were nowhere to be found. Instead, the sound of naval artillery came from an entirely different direction. Harris had thrown out the rule book and attacked them from the rear. The morning sun cast long shadows on Ngeibus Island as Colonel William "Bucky" Harris studied the terrain through his field glasses. From his position aboard the command ship, the narrow causeway connecting the small coral atoll to the northern tip of Peleliu looked exactly what it was: a death trap. The Japanese had spent weeks preparing their reception for the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. Harris saw every carefully positioned firing point, every mortar pit, every machine gun nest that Major General Hoshi Imamura's forces had carved into the coral and concrete. Intelligence reports, spread out on an improvised table, told the story in stark numbers. 470 Japanese defenders had turned Ngeibus into a fortress, specifically designed to annihilate Marines attempting the obvious approach. The causeway was barely 50 yards wide at low tide, a perfect funnel that would compress his battalion into a killing field, where interlocking fields of fire would cut down his men like wheat before a scythe. Every artillery piece on the island was zeroed in on that narrow strip of coral and sand. The Japanese had done their homework. Harris lowered his binoculars and turned to Captain Walter Stout, whose weather-beaten face mirrored the same grim assessment. Stay with us and watch till the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and subscribe. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching us from. They expect us to come straight across that causeway, Harris said, his voice carrying the flat certainty of a man who had seen too many predictable assaults end in disaster. Every gun on this island is aimed at the most obvious landing zone. Stout nodded, studying aerial photographs that revealed the intricate defensive network. Standard doctrine says we land on the closest beach and push for the objective. That causeway is the shortest route to the island. He paused, tracing a finger along the narrow strip. It's also suicide. Preparations around them continued with mechanical precision. Amphibious tractors, LVTs, bobbed on the morning swells, their crews performing final checks on engines and weapons. The battleships USS Iowa and USS New Jersey had already begun their preliminary bombardment, their 16-inch shells roaring across the water, shelling the obvious landing zones. F-4U Corsairs circled overhead, awaiting the signal to dive on their assigned targets. Everything was proceeding according to the standard amphibious assault playbook that had carried the Marines across the Pacific. But Harris had spent 3 years watching Marines die following that same playbook on Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and Saipan. He had seen what happened when American forces did exactly what the Japanese expected them to do. The enemy had studied Marine tactics with the same meticulous attention they gave to everything else, and they had learned to prepare their defenses accordingly. The obvious approach was always the most heavily defended. Sergeant John "Red" McCauley approached the command group, his squad leaders following behind him. The veteran NCO's eyes held the same skeptical look Harris had come to recognize in Marines who had survived enough amphibious assaults to develop an instinct for trouble. "Colonel, the men are asking about the landing plan," McCauley said. "They see those firing positions as clearly as we do." Harris turned away from the causeway and looked southeast, where the open ocean stretched to the horizon. The seaward side of Ngeibus presented a starkly different tactical picture. The beaches were narrower, more exposed to the surf, and further from the obvious objective, but they were also virtually undefended. Reconnaissance photos showed only scattered observation posts and light firing positions along the southeastern shore. The Japanese had concentrated their strength where they expected the attack. "We are not going across the causeway," Harris announced, his decision crystallizing as he spoke. The assembled officers exchanged glances, recognizing the moment their commander was about to rewrite the tactical playbook. "We're going to hit them from the sea." The audacity of the plan struck them immediately. An open ocean shore-to-shore amphibious landing would require the Marines to traverse nearly 2 miles in exposed landing craft, battling surf and swells that could swamp their transports or scatter their formation. They would be attacking by a circuitous route, forsaking the advantages of surprise and concentrated firepower that a direct approach offered. But it would also put them where the Japanese least expected them, while Imamura's forces waited in their perfectly prepared kill zone. Harris's Marines would be landing on beaches that had been deliberately left weak because no sane commander would choose such a difficult approach. Imagine a situation where all time-tested strategies, everything you've diligently been taught, suddenly turns into a deadly trap. What if the most obvious path to success actually leads directly to defeat? Many of us have faced moments where familiar solutions only exacerbated the problem, cornering us. But is there a way to turn an apparent weakness into a crushing advantage, forcing the enemy to capitulate to their own unpreparedness? This was precisely the dilemma American Marines faced during one of the most audacious operations of World War II. They encountered an enemy who had thoroughly studied their tactics, building their defenses by anticipating every move. For years, American forces had fought wars following predictable patterns, strictly adhering to doctrines that the enemy had learned to read and neutralize. The Japanese, in turn, had built their defensive strategy on the unwavering certainty that Marines would always act as prescribed by doctrine. And that's when a man ready to break that mold stepped onto the scene. Stay with us and watch till the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and subscribe. And of course, let us know in the comments where you, the viewer, are watching us from. Captain Stout, peering through his binoculars, carefully studied the southeastern coastline, mentally calculating distances and optimal approach angles. "The surf looks tolerable," he said, "but we'll be completely exposed during the landing. If they spot us early and retarget their guns—" "They won't have time for that," Harris cut him off sharply. "All their heavy guns are positioned to cover the causeway. It'll take hours for them to redeploy, and by then we'll already be ashore." He pointed to the lightly defended beaches. "Intel shows about 50 men covering 2 miles of coastline. We can break through there and outflank their positions while they're waiting for us at the causeway." The proposed plan audaciously defied every canon of amphibious warfare. Marines were taught to choose the shortest path to the objective, concentrate forces at the point of attack, and use overwhelming firepower to suppress enemy defenses. Harris, however, proposed to spread his battalion across a wide front, approach from the most difficult direction, and forego the concentrated artillery support that seemingly made amphibious landings possible. But it was precisely this unorthodox approach that could catch the Japanese off guard. Stay with us and watch till the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and subscribe. And of course, let us know in the comments where you, the viewer, are watching us from. Macaulay's weathered face slowly broadened into a wide grin as the full implications of the plan became apparent. "They'll be looking the wrong way when we hit the beach." "Exactly," Harris affirmed. "While they're watching an empty causeway, we'll be coming in through their back door." He turned to his staff officers. The decision made. "Signal the fleet. We're changing the landing plan. Naval artillery shifts to the southeastern beaches. Air support will focus on inland positions. And get me the battalion commanders. We're going to show the Japanese what happens when you prepare for the last war. Not this one." Word of the radical changes quickly spread throughout the flotilla, relayed by signal flags and radio messages that reshaped the morning's battle before the 1st Marine even set foot on the island. At 6:30 a.m., the first amphibious tractors, LVTs, churning through the morning swells, began their journey. Their tracks bit into the water, which shifted from deep blue to lighter hues, signaling the approach to Ngeibus Island. Harris was in the lead vehicle with Stout's company, watching the southeastern beaches grow larger through the spray-streaked windshield. Behind them, 23 other tracked vehicles carried the assault waves of the 3rd Battalion, their engines straining against the Pacific swells that threatened to scatter their formation. The naval bombardment shifted precisely as Harris had ordered. Instead of raining shells on the obvious landing zones by the causeway, the 16-inch guns of the USS Iowa and USS New Jersey methodically shelled the island's interior, targeting command bunkers and supply depots that intelligence had identified through aerial photography. The sound of the heavy guns from this angle was different. Muzzle flashes were visible on the horizon as each salvo roared overhead to explode among the coral ridges where Major General Imamura had placed his reserves. From his Japanese command bunker, overlooking the causeway, Private First Class Tatsuji Isida peered through his periscope, scanning the approaches in anticipation of the presumed American advance. The morning bombardment intensified, but the shells were falling in the wrong places, striking areas of no strategic significance for an attack across the narrow land bridge. Perhaps the American artillerymen were just warming up their guns, or perhaps their intelligence was flawed. In any case, Isida and his comrades remained focused on the kill zone they had spent weeks preparing. Machine gun nests carved into the coral provided perfect fields of fire. Mortar positions were ranged to the meter. Every approach across the causeway had been plotted, measured, and recorded for supporting indirect fire. When the Marines charged across that narrow strip of land, they would walk directly into interlocking automatic weapon fire that would cut them down before they went 50 yards. The plan was flawless. But 2 miles away, the first wave of LVTs was already hitting the southeastern beaches of Ngeibus Island. Resistance was exactly as Harris had predicted. Scattered rifle fire from observation posts manned by soldiers tasked with watching for diversionary attacks, not repelling a major assault. Sergeant Macaulay's squad landed on the beach in the third vehicle, their boots splashing through the shallows onto coral sand that crunched under their gear. Japanese positions on this stretch of coast consisted mainly of camouflaged foxholes and a few concrete observation bunkers built to detect approaching fleets, not repel landing forces. The defenders had light weaponry, rifles, a few machine guns, and mortars, but nothing like the concentrated firepower that awaited at the causeway. They fought with the desperate courage of soldiers who knew they were vastly outnumbered, but their resistance quickly crumbled under the onslaught of a full Marine battalion assault. Stout's company advanced inland with mechanical precision, using flamethrowers to clear bunkers and demolition charges to destroy observation posts. Each fallen position opened breaches in the Japanese defensive line, allowing more Marines to push through and secure ground that Imamura's forces had never expected to seriously defend. The southeastern beaches were a calculated risk in the Japanese defensive plan, too difficult to attack to warrant heavy fortification, yet close enough to main positions to be reinforced if necessary. However, there was no time for reinforcements. By Oro 7-0, Harris had 3 companies ashore, pushing inland, moving through coconut groves and coral formations that provided natural cover from the heavy weaponry positioned to defend the causeway. The surprise was complete. Imagine a situation where you've meticulously built defenses for years, anticipating every possible threat, every angle of attack, but the enemy appears where they shouldn't be. What is it like when your strongest fortifications prove useless because the enemy doesn't even approach them from the expected direction? Many of us have faced a similar feeling of helplessness when meticulously planned strategies crumble due to a single, non-obvious detail. Today, we'll transport ourselves to the battlefield to understand how a brilliant defensive design was utterly shattered in just a few hours. You'll learn how American Marines achieved the impossible, breaking all canons of amphibious assault and forcing the enemy to fight on their own seemingly impregnable positions. Radio intercepts revealed frantic Japanese radio traffic. Commanders desperately trying to understand why American naval gunfire was raining down on their rear areas, while their forward positions remained untouched. The first Japanese counterattack was launched by a reserve company stationed in the island's center. Isida found himself running through unfamiliar terrain, his rifle clutched in hands slick with sweat. As the reality of the situation clarified, it became obvious. The Americans were not crossing the causeway at all. They were already ashore, already advancing through positions that should have been safe, already threatening the meticulously prepared defensive network from a direction that had never been adequately considered. Stay with us and watch till the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and subscribe. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching us from. Fighting inland was fierce but swift. Japanese soldiers, trained for static defense, found themselves engaged in a fluid battle against Marines who had honed their tactics over 3 years of island warfare. Individual acts of courage could not compensate for the tactical surprise and superior force. Pillboxes designed to fire seaward were vulnerable to attacks from their blind spots. Machine gun positions oriented towards the causeway could not traverse quickly enough to engage targets approaching from the jungle. Macaulay's squad encountered the stiffest resistance near a communications bunker housing radio equipment linked to the main Japanese command on Peleliu. The bunker was built into a coral ridge with excellent fields of fire towards the obvious landing zones, but its rear entrance was defended by only a few riflemen who expected to encounter desperate survivors from a frontal assault, not fresh Marines advancing through covered terrain. A team of flamethrower operators advanced under covering fire, their weapons hissing as streams of jellied gasoline reached the bunker's firing slits. The explosion, as the fuel tanks inside the position ignited, was heard across half the island, sending a column of black smoke rising into the morning sky. With the communication hub destroyed, Japanese units across the island lost contact with their headquarters and each other, turning a coordinated defense into a series of isolated strongpoints. By Oro 830, Harris had achieved what conventional amphibious assault doctrine deemed impossible. His Marines had established a secure beachhead without incurring heavy casualties, advanced inland with minimal resistance, and seized key terrain dominating the approaches to the main Japanese positions. The perfect kill zone Imamura had prepared still waited along the causeway, its guns aimed at empty water, while American forces consolidated their positions on ground that was supposed to be impregnable. The tactical situation had flipped in less than 2 hours. Instead of assaulting prepared positions from the most difficult direction, the Marines now held the high ground and could dismantle Japanese defenses from the rear. The systematic destruction of Ngeibus Island's defensive network began at 09 Ziyahars, as Harris's Marines turned their attention to the elaborate fortifications Major General Imamura had spent weeks constructing. Stay with us and watch till the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and subscribe. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching us from. The coastal pillboxes, designed to annihilate Marines crossing the causeway, now found themselves under attack from their undefended rear approaches. Their thick concrete walls and steel reinforcements were useless against enemies who had already completely bypassed the kill zone. Stout's company moved through the defensive positions like a demolition crew, each bunker presenting the same tactical problem with the same destructive solution. The Japanese had built their fortifications to withstand a frontal assault from the sea, with thick concrete facing seaward and overlapping fields of fire that covered every approach from the obvious landing zones. But the rear entrances were protected by no more than camouflaged steel doors, designed to repel infiltration, not organized infantry assaults. The first major strongpoint fell to a coordinated assault that became the template for every subsequent attack. While one squad provided suppressing fire to pin down any Japanese troops who might attempt to reinforce the position, Macaulay's flamethrower team approached from the bunker's blind side. The portable flamethrower hissed, sending jets of jellied gasoline through the ventilation slits and firing ports, filling the concrete chamber with superheated gases that rendered the position uninhabitable in seconds. When the steel door finally opened, the surviving defenders tumbled out with their hands raised, their uniforms singed, and their weapons discarded, in the raging inferno behind them. The bunker, which had been designed to hold an entire Marine battalion for hours, was neutralized by a 4-man team in less than 10 minutes. The tactical advantage of attacking from an unexpected direction compressed what should have been a day-long battle into a series of short, one-sided engagements. Private First Class Ishida found himself trapped in a mortar pit, positioned to shell Marines attempting to cross the causeway. The circular concrete structure was built with a narrow entrance facing inland, away from the expected direction of attack. But that same entrance now provided easy access for American forces who had already penetrated the defensive perimeter. The mortar itself was a Type 97 weapon, capable of dropping 80mm shells with devastating accuracy, but its fixed position meant it could only target predefined areas that the Marines had already bypassed. The sound of approaching footsteps on the coral shingle told Ishida his position had been discovered. Through a narrow firing slit, he saw American soldiers moving through terrain that should have been occupied by Japanese reserves. The defensive plan called for these reserves to counterattack any American forces that managed to secure a beachhead, driving them back into the sea before they could consolidate their positions. Instead, the reserves had been scattered and destroyed piecemeal, caught off guard by an assault that materialized from an impossible direction. When the flamethrower team reached his position, Ishida faced a decision hundreds of his comrades had already made. Surrender meant survival, but it also meant acknowledging that a perfect defensive plan had been utterly outmaneuvered by enemy forces who refused to follow the expected script. The concrete walls, which had seemed so reassuring during weeks of preparation, now felt like a tomb, trapping him in a position that had become tactically useless. The flamethrower's fuel tank ignited the air inside the mortar pit, with a pop that could be heard 50 yards away. Ishida stumbled toward the entrance, his rifle forgotten, his hands already rising above his head as he emerged into sunlight that seemed impossibly bright after the darkness of the burning fortification. Another position had fallen. Another part of Imamura's defensive network was eliminated, and the systematic destruction of Ngeibus Island continued with mechanical efficiency. Imagine spending years building your defenses, meticulously planning for every threat, every scenario. You are confident your fortress is impregnable. But what if all your efforts, all your ingenious plans collapse overnight because you were looking in the wrong direction? Today, we will tell a story that will make you rethink the very concept of security. This is a narrative of how one of the most powerful defensive systems crumbled under an attack no one expected, and why the island's deadliest gun proved utterly useless. What? How is this possible? Is this about me? Perhaps. Because even in our own lives, we sometimes build walls in the wrong places. By 10 o'clock on that fateful morning, Colonel Harris had completed the regrouping of his battalion, preparing for the decisive phase of the assault. The southeastern beaches, previously seen as merely a vulnerable stretch, had transformed into a reliable supply artery. Additional landing vehicle tracked LVTs tirelessly ferried ammunition, medical supplies, and reinforcements across the 2-mile expanse of open water that had seemed so threatening during the initial planning phase. What was initially perceived as a significant disadvantage, the long, exposed approach from the sea, had turned into a strategic advantage. It allowed the Marines to sustain their operations without interruption, avoiding reliance on the disputed contested causeway. The last pocket of organized resistance on the island was concentrated along the northwestern coast. Here, bunkers and artillery positions had been erected to control the approaches from Peleliu. These powerful guns were intended to turn the causeway into a deadly trap for any American forces daring to cross it. Their concrete walls faced the sea. Embrasures provided ideal fields of fire across the narrow water channel, and underground chambers stored enough ammunition to sustain defensive fighting for many weeks. But there was one fatal flaw. They all faced completely the wrong way. Stay with us and watch until the end, because it's only going to get more interesting. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The Marines, in turn, advanced from the landward side, skillfully using coconut groves and coral formations as natural cover. They moved close enough to deploy demolition charges and flamethrowers against the completely undefended rear entrances. Each fallen position opened new avenues for assault teams, triggering a chain reaction of collapse that only accelerated as the morning offensive progressed. The largest bunker complex housed a Type 96 coastal defense gun, specifically designed to engage American warships attempting to provide fire support for amphibious operations. This weapon was capable of firing a 150mm shell with such accuracy that it could damage or even sink cruisers at a range of over 10 miles, posing a severe threat to naval forces supporting the Marine landing. Its concrete fortification was designed to withstand direct hits from battleship guns. 4-foot-thick walls and a steel-reinforced roof could repel even 16-inch shells. The gun crew inside the bunker had trained for months to engage surface targets approaching from the sea. They knew the distances to every prominent point intimately, could calculate firing solutions for moving targets, and could maintain accurate fire even under the heaviest counter-barrage. However, what they had never practiced was defending their position from an infantry attack from the landward side. Such an assault was considered simply impossible, given the defensive structures that were supposed to protect the island's interior. When Macaulay's squad reached the bunker's rear entrance, the Marines discovered a steel door designed to defend against saboteurs, but certainly not against combat engineers with shaped charges. The explosion ripped the door from its hinges and sent shock waves through the concrete chamber, leaving the gun crew stunned and disoriented. In just a few minutes, the most powerful gun on Ngeibus Island was silenced by a handful of Marines who had approached from a direction the defensive planners had never seriously considered. The systematic destruction of each position created a tactical momentum that became unstoppable as the Japanese defensive network crumbled from within. And don't forget to stay with us until the very end to find out how this battle concluded. A like and subscription will help us create more stories like this, and your comment mentioning your city will be our best reward. The final Japanese counterattack began at 11:30 a.m. Surviving units of Major General Imamura's garrison attempted to retake the central ridge, which controlled access to their remaining positions. The assault was launched simultaneously from 3 directions, coordinated by junior officers who managed to maintain radio contact despite the destruction of the main command bunker. This was the last organized act of resistance the defenders were capable of. A desperate gamble intended to reverse the tactical situation before the Marines completed the systematic destruction of the island's defenses. Private First Class Ashita found himself part of a hastily formed unit that included survivors from coastal bunkers, reserve troops caught off guard in their barracks by the sudden attack, and even cooks and clerks who had to be pressed into service as riflemen. The plan, in its desperation, was brutally simple. Attack across open ground towards American positions, breach their perimeter, and retake the high ground. This would allow the remaining heavy guns to shell the Marine beachhead. Success would restore the defensive network's functionality and trap American forces between the sea and the revived Japanese positions. Failure, however, would mean the complete collapse of organized resistance on Ngeibus Island. In this final engagement, the terrain favored the defenders. The central ridge was honeycombed with natural coral caves and man-made tunnels that served as hidden routes between positions. This allowed small groups of Japanese soldiers to approach within grenade-throwing distance of Marine trenches. These subterranean passages had been dug over many weeks of preparation, creating a network of concealed positions capable of supporting each other even after surface structures were destroyed. The Americans would have to root out each cave individually, using flamethrowers and demolition charges in close-quarters combat, negating their superiority in firepower and mobility. Sergeant Macaulay's squad occupied a cluster of shell craters near the top of the ridge. Their position afforded an excellent view of the approaches from the north and west. The Marines had learned to recognize subtle signs indicating Japanese tunnels. Barely perceptible depressions in the coral surface, patches of discolored vegetation, ventilation shafts disguised as natural formations. Each cave mouth represented a potential source of enemy fire, demanding constant vigilance and immediate reaction upon detecting movement. The first indication of the counterattack came from tripwires Macaulay had set up on the most likely avenues of approach. Thin steel cables, salvaged from destroyed Japanese communications equipment, were invisible in the morning shadows, but produced distinctive sounds upon contact with advancing troops. The sergeant heard the distinct ping of a broken wire from 3 different directions within 30 seconds. This confirmed that the enemy was launching a coordinated assault rather than the isolated infiltration attempts that had characterized the previous hours of fighting. How often do you face tasks that seem impossible, problems that, according to experts, can only be solved at the cost of immense sacrifices? Perhaps you've often felt cornered, where every attempt to break through impregnable walls resulted only in new losses. But what if there's another way, a path that not only shatters all conventional patterns, but also allows for complete victory with minimal losses? Today, we will reveal 3 tactical secrets that transformed one of the most fortified positions in the Pacific from a deadly trap into a triumph. And the first secret we'll discuss will make you reconsider the fundamentals of military art. We will see how to turn a tactical situation on its head using not brute force, but insight and unconventional thinking. Stay with us and watch until the end, because each subsequent technique will be even more unexpected. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription, and of course let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. For many hours of fierce confrontation, Captain Stout, with incredible ingenuity, directed the Marines' counteractions from his command post located in a captured Japanese bunker. He used the very same underground telephone lines that had previously connected the enemy's defensive network to maintain contact with his scattered platoon. The incredible paradox of the situation could not escape his attention. American forces were now using Japanese infrastructure to defend against Japanese attacks, completely reversing the tactical disposition so that the original defensive plan became a burden for its creators. The epicenter of fierce clashes unfolded around a complex of interconnected caves where the remnants of a Japanese machine gun company had taken refuge. Type 96 light machine guns were repositioned to fire from hidden positions within coral formations. Their muzzle flashes were invisible to surface observers, but their deadly enfilade fire was devastating to anyone attempting to cross the open areas between Marine positions. Each such weapon was supported by riflemen armed with Type 38 bolt-action rifles, creating a crossfire that turned any advance into a carefully calculated risk. Harris moved between his company's positions, assessing the evolving tactical situation and making decisions that would determine whether the counteroffensive could be contained or if it would force his Marines to surrender hard-won ground. The Japanese push was better organized than he had anticipated, indicating that enemy commanders had managed to retain some control despite the destruction of their communications network. Individual acts of bravery were coordinated into coherent tactical maneuvers, turning what should have been a desperate last stand into a genuine threat to American positions. The turning point came when a Marine flamethrower team managed to reach the entrance of the main cave complex, despite a hail of fire from Japanese machine gun positions. The portable flamethrower was designed specifically for this type of close-quarters combat. Its charge of jellied gasoline was capable of penetrating confined spaces where conventional explosives would be ineffective. The operator, a corporal from Kansas, whose steady hands had already cleared dozens of bunkers that morning, approached the cave mouth with the methodical precision of a craftsman, applying a familiar tool to a well-understood task. The initial blast of flame illuminated the interior of the cave system, revealing the extent of the Japanese positions and the number of defenders sheltering within the coral passages. Superheated gases filled every chamber and tunnel, creating an environment that instantly became lethal to anyone remaining underground. Within minutes, organized resistance from the cave complex was completely suppressed, thereby eliminating a linchpin of the entire Japanese defensive line. Ashita emerged from a secondary tunnel 50 yards from the main cave entrance. His uniform was singed, and his rifle lost somewhere in the smoke-filled passages behind him. The retreat turned into a rout as surviving Japanese soldiers abandoned their positions and fled towards the northern tip of the island, where a few scattered bunkers still offered the illusion of defensive strength. The counteroffensive had completely failed, exhausting the last reserves of organized resistance in a futile attempt to alter a tactical situation that had been hopeless from the moment the Marines landed on the wrong beaches. By 12:20 p.m., the systematic destruction of Japanese positions resumed with mechanical efficiency. Every remaining bunker was isolated, surrounded, and eliminated using the same methods that had proven effective throughout the morning. Flamethrowers cleared the interiors. Demolition charges collapsed the concrete structures, and rifle fire eliminated any defenders attempting to escape. The perfect killing zone that Major General Imamura had designed to destroy an entire Marine battalion had been turned inside out, becoming a trap for its creators rather than their enemies. The final tally of the counteroffensive told a story in numbers that reflected a complete reversal of the tactical situation. 470 Japanese soldiers killed or captured versus 15 Marines killed and 33 wounded. The arithmetic of amphibious warfare had been rewritten by a commander who refused to follow the obvious plan. The silence that settled over Ngeibus Island at 1 p.m. on September 29th carried a weight that spoke louder than the morning's cacophony of gunfire. Colonel Harris stood amidst the wreckage of what had been Major General Imamura's perfect defensive network, surveying concrete bunkers reduced to rubble and gun positions that would never again threaten American forces attempting to cross the narrow causeway. The transformation was complete. A fortress that had taken weeks to construct and fortify was dismantled in less than 6 hours by Marines who refused to attack it the way its builders expected. The tactical implications extended far beyond the coral beaches of a small Pacific atoll. Harris had demonstrated that conventional amphibious landing doctrine could be rewritten when commanders were willing to abandon predictable approaches in favor of innovative thinking. The by-the-book solution for Ngeibus Island would have involved a frontal assault across the causeway, supported by massive naval bombardment and preceded by days of airstrikes designed to soften the defensive positions. Such an attack would ultimately have succeeded, but at the cost of hundreds of American casualties and weeks of fierce fighting. Instead, the Marines achieved complete victory in 48 hours, incurring losses that were barely noticeable against the backdrop of operations in the Pacific Theater. 15 killed and 33 wounded represented tragic losses for the affected families and units. But they amounted to only a fraction of what conventional wisdom predicted for assaulting such heavily fortified positions. 470 Japanese defenders were completely eliminated as an organized fighting force. Their elaborate defensive preparations rendered useless in the face of an enemy who attacked from an impossible direction. How many times has a person poured their heart and soul into creating a plan that seemed flawless, infallible, only to face complete collapse at the most crucial moment? What? How is this about me? Perhaps you don't even realize that the reason for such catastrophes lies not in a lack of diligence or skill, but in a cunning trap of thinking capable of nullifying any, even the most titanic, efforts. We are accustomed to believing that meticulous preparation and strict adherence to rules are the unshakable foundation of success. However, the story we will tell today challenges this conviction. In this video, we will reveal how an entire defensive complex on which years and colossal resources were spent, considered absolutely impregnable, was once routed in a matter of hours. We will show how to avoid the fate of those who, possessing every advantage, suffered a crushing defeat due to a mere blindness to the new. Stay with us and watch until the end because what you're about to learn could completely change your understanding of strategy and tactics. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And please tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Imagine Ngeibus Island, transformed into an impregnable fortress by Japanese engineers and soldiers. Captain Stout, walking through the central command bunker that served as Imamura's headquarters during the preparation phase, studied maps and documents revealing the meticulous planning invested in fortifying this island. Every inch was considered, every possible scenario rehearsed. With the same meticulous precision that characterized all their military preparations, Japanese strategists analyzed American amphibious tactics. They surgically pinpointed the most probable landing zones, calculated optimal positions for their heavy artillery, and created overlapping fields of fire capable of turning any force daring an obvious approach into hell. The defensive plan was tactically flawless, thoroughly developed operationally, and strategically useless. We ask you to stay with us and watch this video until the very end so you don't miss a single detail of this amazing story. We would be especially grateful for your like and subscription. And please don't forget to write in the comments which city or country you are watching us from. It was designed to counter the tactics of the previous war, not to adapt to the innovative thinking that characterized the best American commanders. Imamura prepared his forces for a repeat of the Battle of Tarawa, creating killing zones that would be devastating for Marines following established doctrine. But Colonel Harris, commanding the American forces, had studied those same battles and came to radically different conclusions about the relationship between tactical surprise and operational success. He knew that the most dangerous enemy is one who refuses to play by the rules. While a new chapter of military history unfolded on one end of the island, Sergeant Macaulay supervised the destruction of salvaged Japanese equipment. He meticulously ensured that weapons and ammunition that had survived the morning's fighting could not be used by hiding enemies or sabotage teams. Type 96 machine guns, once positioned to sweep the causeway, were disassembled into components and sent to American intelligence units for technical analysis. A coastal defense gun, capable of threatening cruisers and destroyers, was detonated with shaped charges, leaving its steel barrel twisted and its concrete fortification cracked beyond repair. This systematic destruction served both practical and psychological purposes. From a practical standpoint, it ensured that Ngeibus Island could never again serve as a base for Japanese operations against American forces in Palau or the surrounding waters. Psychologically, it sent an unmistakable signal to enemy commanders across the Pacific. Even the most sophisticated defensive preparations were no guarantee against innovative American tactics. The perfect killing zone, meticulously planned by the Japanese, became a prime example of how rigid thinking can be defeated by flexible execution. Private First Class Ishida was among the Japanese survivors being processed at a temporary prisoner collection point set up by the Marines near the southeastern beaches. The irony was undeniable. He was held on the very ground where American forces had landed that morning, beaches that Japanese planners had dismissed as too difficult to assault and too insignificant for serious fortification. His capture occurred not because he fought poorly, but because the entire defensive concept had been bypassed before the first shot was even fired. The interrogation process revealed how profoundly the Japanese forces had been psychologically prepared for an entirely different battle. Prisoners consistently described their surprise at an attack from land rather than sea, their confusion when American naval artillery targeted rear areas instead of coastal positions, and their inability to coordinate an effective response when communications were severed by strikes on facilities presumed to be securely defended. The tactical surprise was so complete that many defenders never truly understood what was happening until their positions were overrun. Intelligence officers documented weapons and equipment, providing insight into Japanese defensive doctrine and technological capabilities. Bunker construction methods demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how to create positions capable of withstanding heavy bombardments, but they also revealed flawed assumptions about the direction from which attacks would come. Embrasures faced seaward. Communication lines connected positions along the expected axis of advance, and supply routes were designed to support forces engaged in a prolonged frontal battle, not a mobile defense against multi-directional attacks. Colonel Harris submitted his after-action report from the deck of a command ship, while landing craft continued to shuttle supplies and personnel between the mainland and the newly secured island. The tactical lessons learned at Ngeibus would influence amphibious operations throughout the remainder of the Pacific campaign, demonstrating that innovative thinking could achieve decisive results with minimal casualties when applied against enemies prepared for predictable attacks. The strategic significance extended far beyond the immediate tactical victory. Japanese forces across the Pacific had invested immense resources in building defensive networks, based on the assumption that American commanders would follow established amphibious assault doctrine. If these assumptions could be consistently disproven, Japan's entire defensive strategy would require a fundamental reassessment at a time when resources and manpower were already stretched to their limits. So the morning sun, rising over the heavily fortified Japanese stronghold, now illuminated American positions controlling all approaches to Ngeibus Island. The perfect killing zone had been transformed into a prime example of how tactical innovation could rewrite the rules of warfare. The narrow causeway, intended to funnel Marines into devastating crossfire, now served as a supply route for American forces, who had completely bypassed the trap and turned it against its creators. In less than 48 hours, Colonel Harris had proven that the most dangerous enemy to any defensive plan is an attacker who refuses to behave as expected.